today is July 18th, and we're excited to welcome Josh Seiden to do our CG talk today. So many of you probably know Josh. He's a well-known designer, author, coach, speaker, and a former council member. He's co-authored a couple of books that often come up in council meetings, Lean UX and Sense and Respond. Both of which, are great books and often recommended, and at least in the product council discussions that I've been in. And Josh came out with a book recently that focuses on a topic that also comes up a lot in council meetings, which is how to align our organizations around outcomes instead of activities or outputs. And it's something that most of us struggle with. And while we know it's the right thing to do, it's hard to actually put in place. And so that was one of the reasons why Josh wrote the book, to create a practical and focused guide for folks like us. So he'll spend about a half an hour sharing some of his thoughts from the book and some of his stories and lessons there. And then we'll have about a half an hour or the rest of the time for Q&A. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Josh, and I'll just say it's so nice to have you participating in the councils again. And I'd love to ask if you could kick off the talk by just kind of sharing a little bit with the group about what inspired you to write the book.
Sure.
And how it's maybe different or distinct from some of the other books you've written.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Maya, and thanks for having me here. It's great, as you said, to be back with the councils. I actually, I've been my business partner for close to the last 10 years. Has been a guy named Jeff Gothelf, who I wrote a couple of books with and opened a couple of businesses with. And Jeff and I think we met originally through the councils. So that was a great intro for me, and it's been a while since I've had a chance to interact with the councils, because I've been an independent consultant for a while as opposed to being in-house. So it's nice to be back. So to get started, you asked like why I wrote the book. Well, there's sort of two reasons. That's all right. The first is that Jeff and I actually co-founded a small publishing company together called Sense and Respond Press to do small practical business books about digital transformation and customer experience and innovation. And so having published a number of books, I was sort of primed to look for interesting topics to write about myself. And this topic about outcomes over output, it kept coming up in my consulting work. I do a lot of work to help teams sort of work together more efficiently and more effectively. And one of the things you hear all the time when you're doing this work is, we want to be more outcome focused. We want to be more outcome centric. And it's kind of like a mom and apple pie kind of sentiment. Like, you can't really argue with it. But by the same token, teams that are trying to work this way, teams that are trying to focus on outcomes, find that it's difficult to get past the sort of slogan level and to actually work in a meaningful way with outcomes. And so in the course of my consulting, I had the opportunity to find some like very specific and concrete practices that work and that help teams put these ideas into motion. And so that's what the book is about. It's to try and capture that. The first thing that I've discovered is that it's really important when you're working or trying to work with outcomes. It's really important to have a very, very specific definition of the phrase of this word outcomes, because if you're not specific about it, it just becomes another generic word to talk about results. And so what I wanted to do was to be a lot more specific so that teams could be actionable with the idea. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the definition that I use in the book of what an outcome is. And then I'm going to talk to you for the next little while about some examples of how you can put that definition into motion at your organization, okay? So the first thing is what is the definition of an outcome? And so when I say outcome, I mean something really, really specific. I mean this, what's on the screen. An outcome is a measurable change in behavior that drives business results. So it's a measurable change in human behavior that drives business results. This can be customer behavior, this can be user behavior, this can be employee behavior, but it's someone doing something differently that drives business results. And to give you an example of this, let me do a thought experiment with you to try and illustrate what this means. I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you work at a sort of smallish town in the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, just to pick randomly on a state. And so you work in this city government, and your job is traffic safety. And one day your boss comes to you and she says, Josh, in this thought experiment, your name is also Josh. Your boss says, Josh, this intersection down at the mall is really dangerous, and your job is to make this intersection safer. And so you go down to the intersection, you observe it, and you see that this right turn only lane is pretty much being ignored. People are turning left. It's a T intersection, but people are not stopping. You're supposed to stop at a T intersection. And so you go back to your boss and you say to her, listen, I have a perfect plan. I'm going to work with the Department of Public Works, and we're going to put up some street signs. They'll say stop, they'll say no left turn, and we'll get that intersection under control. And your boss says, great, go do it. And so you do it. You work with the Department of Public Works, and you put up these street signs, stop, no left turn, and you're very proud of the work. And the next day you go down to the intersection to observe what's going on, and this is what you see. And so what do we see, right? People are turning left. People are blowing through the intersection. It's not working. It's not working. And so what do we take away from this story? Well, I want to talk to you about this language here, this language that we can use around outcomes. So this is taken from a framework for planning from the Kellogg Foundation. I can share a link to this if you want to read about it in more detail. But here's the basic story. So your boss came to you and asked for a safer street. That's a high-level goal, and we call that an impact. Okay? It's the sum of many factors. And you went and you made a plan, right? You said, we're going to work with the Department of Public Works. We're going to build these street signs, and at the end of the day, we're going to have these street signs, these outputs. We've made this stuff. The stuff we made is the street sign. The problem is that the street signs did not create the outcome that we were seeking. Right? The outcome that we were seeking, the change in behavior that we were seeking, was that we wanted people to stop, and we wanted people to not make left turns. And so even though we had made our output, our street signs, we did not achieve the outcome that we were seeking. And there's something important here which I want to stop and I want to notice, which is that there's nothing wrong with the output here. We made perfect street signs. They matched the specifications, they matched the requirements, they matched the national standards. They were delivered on time and on budget. There's nothing wrong with the output, except that the output didn't create the outcome that we were trying to achieve. And this is so often the case in our work in product development, which is that we make a feature and it's sort of perfect in that it matches the specification, and yet it doesn't achieve the outcome for our user, for our customer, or for our business. And so that's why in so many of our businesses, when we are feature-centric, we want to pivot and we want to become more outcome-centric. And we do that by using this very specific definition that outcome is a measurable change in behavior that drives business results. So at this point, right, you're probably saying, okay, I understand. Now, how do I go about finding the outcomes that our business should be pursuing? In the book, I write about 3 what I call magic questions that we can use to help start finding our outcomes. Right? And I'll give you an example of these questions in motion in a minute. But the 3 magic questions are, what are the behaviors that drive business results? Right? So what do our customers do that create value for them and for the business? How do we get people to do more of these behaviors? And then, since all of this is a question of we're trying to plan our work, how do we know we got it right? Right? What will we look at to understand whether the stop sign that we built had the effect that we intended? And so to talk about, maybe to make this a little more concrete, I want to share with you a case study that I think illustrates nicely how these 3 questions are used. This is from some work I did with a client of mine a couple of years ago called Taproot Foundation. Now, Taproot Foundation are a nonprofit organization based here in New York City. And what they do is they match other nonprofit organizations that need professional services with skilled professional volunteers who want to donate their time. So you might be a nonprofit who needs a marketing plan. And there might be volunteers out here, skilled marketers, who are willing to work with you to create a marketing plan, something like that. And so Taproot Foundation creates a match between volunteers and the nonprofits who need their services. And then Taproot Foundation sort of sits in the middle and helps the volunteers and the nonprofits work together over the course of a 3 to 6 month consulting engagement. And so my client at Taproot Foundation called me and said, look, we've been given a strategic mandate for the coming year. We've been told that our mandate is to increase the net promoter score of our service. And we'd like to do that, but we're really not sure how to proceed. And can you come in and help us? And so, so that's what I did. And for those of you who are not familiar with Net Promoter Score is just a way of determining whether customers would recommend your service to their trusted circle. It's a proxy for customer satisfaction. Okay. And so if you go back to this logic model framework, right, they had been asked to create an impact, a high level target, which was to increase the net promoter score of their business. And they were looking at creating their annual plan. And they said, look, we don't know what we should make, what we should do to increase net promoter score. And so that was the question they were working on figuring out. And to get started, we said, okay, well, what are the outcomes that we're seeking here, right? What are the measurable changes in behavior that will create a higher net promoter score? To do that, then, we had to understand, if you're thinking about how do we change the behavior of our users, our customers, our staff, you have to understand what those behaviors are. So we created a simple map, and we said, look, this is the map of all of the activities that take place in the course of delivering our service. We start the service at phase 1. Here's what the volunteers do. Here's what the nonprofits do. And here's what we do. And then we move on to phase 2. Here's the behaviors and so on. So we kind of mapped out all the behaviors in the system. And then we went back through that map and we said, what are the things that predict success? What are the success factors? What are the things that we want people to do more of? In other words, they knew that when people responded to email promptly, projects were more likely to be successful. When people met each other in person at the beginning of the projects were more likely to be successful. And we also knew that there were some things that predicted failure, like if people were not responding to email. And so we went through the map and we said, what are the behaviors that predict success and which ones are the ones that predict failure? And what do we think are the most important ones? And we created a prioritized list of the behaviors we wanted to target. And that prioritized list, though, that became our plan for the year. That was our roadmap. We said, look, we want the most important thing for us to work on in the first quarter is to get people to respond to email more quickly. And the next most important thing for us to work on in the quarter is to get people to actually show up at meetings. Right? And so what we were doing, right, we'd said, okay, look, we want to increase Net Promoter Score. And now we know the outcomes that we're targeting. That's our prioritized list. That's our roadmap. And then we went back to our outputs and we said, well, what are we going to make? What are we going to do? And we said, well, actually, we still don't know. Now, this is a point where outcome-focused work can be problematic, right? Because we're used to planning in terms of features. But not knowing what features you're going to build in the next year, I'm here to tell you that's a good thing. That's a good thing because we don't really have certainty about which features are going to get people to show up to meetings. In fact, we have to test and try and see what's going to get people to show up to meetings, what's going to get people to respond to email more quickly. And so by focusing on our outcomes and saying, look, we're still not sure, it puts us in a position to test our work, right? To express our work as a set of testable hypotheses, right? And we can come back to this hypothesis stuff in the Q&A. But it lets us kind of create this very agile loop, right? It lets us say, look, we're going to try this thing to get people to respond to meetings. We're going to sense if it works. And if it does, great, we'll do more of it. And if not, we'll respond appropriately. Okay. And so that story, I think, illustrates the kind of the magic questions for finding outcomes. What are the behaviors that drive business results? Those are the outcomes that we seek. How do we get people to do more of these behaviors? Those are the features that we'll build or the actions that we'll take. And then how do we know we're right? Those are the tests that we'll run to see if our stop signs, for example, are working. Okay. So I want to share one more quick story before I end and kind of turn to the Q&A. I want to talk a little bit about how that last story talks about how this can be used for planning on a single team. I want to talk a little bit about how this can be used for planning in a large organization. So this is a case study that I write a little bit about in Sense and Respond. This is from a relatively successful startup, about 700-800 people with a large product organization. And it's a story of how they do their annual planning. And so they work in a sort of a top-down and bottom-up way when they're doing their annual plans. At a high level, the leadership team is expressing their strategic intent, their strategic priorities, their what we call those impact level metrics. They might say something like, we want to increase our market share in Europe, or we want to shore up our business with one of our customer segments. Right? So it's high level strategic goals. At the product team level, at the staff level, those teams are asked to create a list of all of the possible projects they could work on in the coming year. What are the things customers are asking for? What are the problems in the system? What do they know they'd like to work on? Let's create a big list. At the product management or sort of middle layer, that team is working to kind of meet in the middle here. And so what they're doing is they're looking at the team's list and they're saying, look, we're not going to do 100% of this. We're probably not even going to do 50% of this. The question for us is, which 50% are we going to try? And so they look at the leadership level goals and they say, these projects seem to support this strategic intent. We'll do these. And these, not so much, we'll put these in the parking lot. But then here's the really interesting part. After they've kind of filtered the list, they go back to the leadership group and they say, look, here's our plan for the year, but we're not promising that we're going to deliver any one of these specific product features. What we're committing to is an outcome. We're going to increase market share in Europe from X% to Y%. And we're going to do it with these outputs. Now, if these outputs aren't getting us there, we're going to throw these outputs away and we're going to replace them with new ones. But the commitment that we're making is at the outcome level, okay? We're committing to generating these outcomes for you, and this list of work, this is our hypothesis about what we're going to do going forward. Another way to say this, by the way, has gained a lot of popularity these days. You can talk about these high-level impacts, you can talk about them as objectives, and you can talk about these outcomes as the key results, right? And so there's a really, really tight link between working in an outcome-centric way and working with OKRs, right? If you express your KRs as outcomes with this definition, you have a very, very high chance of writing really good OKRs, okay? So that's the material I wanted to present to you. I know that was a lot of material and probably went by pretty quickly, but we now have the balance of time here to take questions, and I'd love to hear what you all think and what you'd like me to talk about.
Great, thanks, Josh. So anyone who has a question can go ahead and enter it into the Q&A. There's within Zoom at the in the lower panel within the Zoom window, you can submit a question through the Q&A module. And then we can kind of go from there. While we're doing that, I'm going to try to, okay. So there's a great question from Craig. So Craig, I'm going to promote you, open the line for you to talk and to go ahead and introduce yourself to Josh and to ask your question. Let's see. Okay. Craig, can you talk? Or can you? Oh. Can we hear you?
I'm back now.
Okay. Hey, Craig.
Sorry. Hi there.
Hi, Craig.
Craig Hopkins. I'm currently the Chief Information Officer for the City of San Antonio. I've been doing that for about 2 years, but I came out of 20 years of financial services at USAA. So have a lot of customer experience and training. And first of all, I love your city traffic problem. I deal with it every day now. So, so you could pick any city. We'll do that one as an example. So my question to you is, who does this really well today that we can look to companies, either nonprofits, large companies that you see doing this well?
Who does this really well today? That's a great question. It's always a little bit of a stumper. I would like to say that my clients are doing it really well. But honestly, like a lot of the clients that I work with call me because they're working hard to try to implement this. And so, what I see is that the challenge for organizations that want to work this way is that there are often impediments in their process or their structure that makes it hard for them. So just as an example, you might, for a consulting company, might write a contract, and that contract might specify a set of deliverables, right? Well, now you're contractually obliged to deliver outputs as opposed to outcomes. So those kinds of structural obstacles, sales-led B2B organizations, for example, have a tough time with it. The example I write about in the book of a company that I think is doing a really great job with it is hbr.org. And so they've reorganized their group around some high-level outcomes. And then every quarter, they have teams that are working to, for example, increase the consumption of their material or drive subscription or whatever those outcomes are that they seek.
Very good, thanks.
Yeah. Craig, you should check out, we have a terrific book in our series called The Government Fix, which is all about innovation in government. And you'll forgive me if I plug that book, but I think it's a terrific little book about innovation in government. So, check it out.
Awesome. Okay. So we have another question by an anonymous attendee. So I won't be able to promote anyone to ask this, but how many OKRs is appropriate to establish at the overarching digital organization or at the highest level? For example, is there a kind of a rule of thumb not to exceed 4 objectives? Is there a magic number there?
1. There's 1. My rule of thumb is you want to have 1 single high level OKR for a quarter. And then you'll have OKRs that nest under that and that are kind of recursively kind of feeding up into that OKR. But if you try to cover everything with OKRs, you lose kind of the magic of OKRs, which is that they're a focusing mechanism. And they say, look, this is the one thing that we absolutely have to get done. Now, Christina Woodkey has a nice way of thinking about this in her book, Radical Focus. She talks about OKRs, and I'm really echoing her recommendation, which I totally believe in that you have 1 OKR. But she talks about the other piece of it, which is that there's still other things you need to get done as a company. Yeah. And so those things you represent as what she calls health metrics. And so you have 1 OKR, which is your special focus. And then you have health metrics, which are like, these are things we need to do to keep the lights on. But yeah, 1 OKR.
So for the things that companies need to do to keep the lights on, do you still recommend that those activities be positioned as outcomes?
Yeah, I think look, I don't think that I don't think that everything should be expressed as an outcome. Okay. I think that there are some things that are just obvious you need to do. And when it's obvious what you need to do, and it's obvious that by doing that, you're going to fix the problem, then you just do it. So there's a bug, we need to fix the bug. The app crashes, we need to stop crashing, right? But outcomes are really, really good when the situation you're facing has some uncertainty in it. How are we going to get people to log into our system more frequently? How are we going to get customers to spend more time on our site? How are we going to get customers to read more reviews? Because we know that when they read 2 reviews, that doesn't lead to purchase, but any customer that reads 3 reviews, it leads to purchase, right? So how are we going to get them to read that 3rd review? Anytime there's a lot of uncertainty, the outcome is a great way to express the work.
Great, that's really helpful. Okay, so I've got Paige. Paige, can you, I think I promoted you to be able to talk.
Hey, Paige.
Oh, let's see, talking permitted, unmute, let's try again. Paige, can we hear you? Can you try talking again? Oh, darn.
Oh, well.
Okay, we try. We'll come back to you, Paige, because I know you wanted to ask some questions and say hello to Josh. Okay, so the next person who had a question is Michelle Kimes. So Michelle, I'm going to promote you to hopefully be able to talk and then unmute you. Okay, this is a 2-step process I'm learning. Michelle, do you want to try to chime in and voice your question?
Hi, Michelle.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Shoot.
Oh,
I think you can hear me, but now I can't hear you.
I can hear you.
yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can hear me, but I've lost my audio with you somehow in doing this. So maybe what I'll attempt to do is frame my question, and then maybe you can turn me back off, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Okay, will do.
Awesome. So anyway, I'm Michelle. I'm actually on the data science machine learning side of things in our product organization. I head up that function. And so my question comes a little bit from that perspective. A lot of these thoughts resonate with me. They kind of align with kind of the lean startup methodology and so forth.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that in this, and I'm curious to hear your experience with, is in that actual leap from making the assumption of the things that actually influence the business outcome. So in your simplified example, I think it's obvious to us that stopping promotes safer streets, but it seems like in a lot of our cases, you know what the business outcome, but even understanding what are those behaviors that will actually enable that outcome to happen that we want to drive more of, like answering that question first can be challenging in and of itself. So I'm just curious what your experience maybe with some of your clients has been in identifying those things at that phase of the process.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think a lot of this, I mean, I was just talking in the answer to the last question about, working in a context of uncertainty. And so I think there are situations where, we know that a customer behavior creates a business result. And the question we're asking is, how do we get that customer to do more of that thing? And then there's the case that you identified where we think maybe that if the customer does this thing, it will create a business result, but we really don't know. And so those are both useful starting points, right? But we want to be in a position where we're not mistaking one for the other. And so all of this is a process about learning about kind of the mechanics of our business, and the sort of interrelation between what people do, what value they get, and what value we get. And I think working alongside sort of our data partners to try to put these models together and see if they hold water, I think that's an incredible opportunity. In my experience, one of the challenges is that many of my clients don't have good information about what their customers are doing with the system. So I think we kind of assume, consumer. It's easy to, I think, to conceptualize like a consumer-oriented SaaS business where we can see, this is what a customer is clicking on, and we can watch those funnels. But many of my clients don't have that data. So the work is kind of two parts. One is sort of articulating these hypotheses. And then the second is figuring out how are we going to get the data to see if our hypothesis is right. And a lot of time there's just infrastructure work to do to instrument the front end so that we can actually tell what our customers are doing. But yeah, you're exactly right. There are these scenarios where, what we know is this thing is good for everyone and we're trying to increase it. And then there are these other scenarios where we're guessing and we have to conduct an experiment to figure out if there's a relationship.
Cool, thank you. And I moved Michelle back to an attendee and she was able to hear the rest of the answer. So that all
good,
worked
I'm
out.
glad. I'm glad, because I don't think I could have repeated that.
And it looks like we're not able to get Paige into voice her own question, but she sent that through chat. So Paige is, alongside saying hello, was just asking, she says an organization is a living and breathing thing. So how do you decide on the best place to begin to create this change while the business continues to move and deliver as it knows?
Yeah. Well, I think I think that those magic questions are really, really useful starting point. And there's some version of those questions I've used with just about every one of my clients on every one of my client engagements over the last couple of years. And so, for example, you might be thinking about creating some technology initiative. Okay, that's a pretty common starting point. A lot of times what we do when we're planning a technology initiative is we plan a feature roadmap. We're going to build this feature and this feature and this feature. It's really useful at that moment to say, you know, when this initiative is successful, what will our company be doing differently? When this initiative is successful, what will our customers be doing differently? When this initiative is successful, what will our users be doing differently? And how will that create value for us? And then use the answer to those questions to scope down your initiative, to say like, okay, if our users will be logging in more frequently, what could I do today without a 2-year engineering lift to get them to log in more frequently? What could I do with 2 weeks of engineering? What could I do with 3 weeks? Could I continue to grow that metric as I'm delivering features? And so I think that when we're looking in the planning stage page to answer your question, I think you want to start small. You want to try a pilot, and you want to look at, you're not going to do this as a big bang across the organization. You're going to pick a team where there are legitimate questions about how the work is going to deliver value. And you want to start with that team by asking those magic questions.
That's great. And then Paige asked a follow-up question, which is, have you applied this to non-product related outcomes?
Yeah. So I was actually just the beginning of the first half of this year, I was working with a bank, and we were working with business managers. The focus question there was not how do we launch new products and services, but how can we behave more entrepreneurially? So it had nothing to do with technology, had nothing to do with product, but you know, they were planning initiatives. They were planning initiatives like new kinds of trading businesses or new financial products that they were trying to offer. And you're able to use this same question, like when we offer this new financial product, right? What are our customers doing differently that generate value for them and for us, right? And how might we deliver that value early and often without a giant lift to create this new product, right? Can I deliver it to one customer? Can I deliver it to 3 customers? Can I deliver it to 7 customers? A lot of times in large businesses, we think that if we can't do it at scale, there's no point in doing it. And so we start at scale, as opposed to starting with 1 customer and then 2 and then 3, and adding in the infrastructure to scale as it's warranted.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have a member, Pooja, who, let's see, I've just promoted you, Pooja, and I'm going to now unmute you. We'll see if this works, hopefully. Pooja is with Blue Shield of California. Pooja, let's see. Oh, looks like you should be, okay, let me unmute you again. Looks like you should be able to chat now. Can you try to?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, Josh. It's nice to meet you. And I'm
Nice
new
to meet you.
Council, so this is my first session joining, and it's been very informative. So thank you for all the information you've shared. One of the questions I had, and sort of piggybacking off of the previous question around OKRs, I lead our digital product organization, and we think about the role that digital plays in enabling our business strategy. It really cuts across all of the goals that the organization has. Whether it's growing membership, whether it's driving satisfaction, whether it's reducing cost of healthcare, et cetera. And so I'm curious in terms of how to think about your point in terms of a single OKR in that context, because often what we struggle with is even prioritization across those key goals that we have, right? Because oftentimes those enterprise level goals are often in conflict and need sort of prioritization within. So I'm curious in terms of how to think about one single OKR, and I know you said it by quarter, but if you could share a little bit more, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah. So I actually think that this is a problem of strategy that hides as an OKR problem. So I'll tell you, I did a project with a big healthcare client actually a couple of years ago to help them articulate a product portfolio strategy. They had a big portfolio of products. They didn't feel that it was, they'd been acquired over many years, and they wanted to kind of figure out what their product strategy was. So we worked with them to articulate a product strategy that everybody was happy with. And then we said, okay, well, now the next step here is that there are things that we have to do. We have to start doing new things. There's some things that we need to keep doing. And there's some things that we need to stop doing, like there are products that we actually have to sunset. Right? And so we made this list, 3 columns. When we came back the next week to work with them, everything that had been in the stop doing list was moved over to the keep doing list. Right? And so at that point, right, you've named a strategy, but you're not actually living the strategy. Right? And so I think the challenge with OKR is that it needs to drive out of a strategy. And for example, I'm working with a client right now who said, look, in order for us to achieve this overarching corporate goal, like a well-funded startup, and they've got a target that they're trying to hit. In order to achieve our target, we have to achieve this metric. In order to achieve this metric, we have to do this thing with our clients. And in order to do this thing with our clients, we're going to put all our money on this tactic and this tactic, these 2 tactics together. And so our OKR is going to measure the success of that tactic. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not, they've made other board commitments. There's other things that they need to do to keep the lights on. They need to keep selling, et cetera. But the OKR is expressing the key metric. It's expressing the strategy. The objective is we're going to win in this category by doing these things. That's the objective. And we're going to win. We'll know we're winning mm-hmm. when we see these key results expressed mm-hmm. as outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my take on it.
That's great. Thanks.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. And thank you for, good to see you, Pooja. Welcome. And thanks for the question. All right, so now I'm going to try to promote Ben McCaskill from SmugMug into Ben. Can you?
All right.
Almost.
Yes, we could hear you for a second.
Oh.
Let me try again.
Oh, am I back?
You're good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Josh. This has been really fantastic. So I'm COO at SmugMug and Flickr. So online photo sharing. Over the last year or two, we've done a lot of working on OKRs. I feel like we're okay, right? We're not great, but I have yet to meet somebody who feels like they're super great at that. But
yeah,
we're pretty decent. We're rolling down, okay, here's the high level things we want to accomplish. Each product team understands where their strategy fits, and then they have their single OKR. So I think we're relatively okay on outcomes-based stuff. Like, okay, we need more of our customers engaged. Uploading team, your outcome that you want to see is X number of photos more per customer over this time frame, right?
Yeah.
And the brilliance of that is definitely borne out in that I'm not, or somebody else isn't going, okay, well, you need to build this experience in the uploader, right? It's creative. So my question though, is kind of a step down on the how. We're kind of getting them to the why, and standardizing the OKRs or the outcomes across teams and how we set those and how we communicate those is great. But we're seeing teams that we're also being, I wonder if we're being too prescriptive on the methodology of building, right? The agile product, with a capital A and that sort of stuff. I'm just curious how much freedom do you recommend, because it almost feels like, okay, we're giving them the freedom of what to build because we've set this outcome, right? Your outcome is this. We're not telling you to go build street signs. We're telling you we need them to turn right at the intersection. But then I feel like on a process point of view, this is how your sprint should work and that sort of stuff, each team is we're kind of expecting them to work the same. And now we have two platforms, Flickr and SmugMug. And do we take Flickr and do it the exact same way we're doing SmugMug, or do we allow their product leaders more latitude for how they run their team? And I realize I'm getting off into the weeds a little bit on the outcome stuff, but it feels like we're very flexible on one side and not on the other.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this brings up a couple of interesting points. The first is that, I think, I'm a big believer in sort of the idea of the self-organizing team in Agile, right? And so you maybe give teams a starting point to say, like, kind of, here's if you don't have a process, start here, right? But if teams aren't, regularly retrospecting and then meaningfully changing their process at regular intervals, like, I don't think they're meaningfully being Agile. And so I think that naturally leads to teams starting to grow their own methods. So I think what you need to do is you need to constrain that by saying, like, look, there are some really critical points of coordination that we need to stay aligned to, whatever those are in your organization. But process, like, lockstep, I don't know that benefits anyone. That's kind of my first answer. And the second that kind of goes along with this is that you can use this notion of outcomes to monitor internal process as well, right? And you can say, what's the amount of time that it takes for an idea to go live with customers and for us to market validate it, right? After it's been live, or something like that. So you can use outcomes kind of both for external behaviors, but also for internal behaviors. And then maybe the last thing that this brings up, and I don't know that it's directly related to your question, but is this idea of kind of bounding outcomes, right? So, I think it's easy for us to say, like, okay, look, we want teams to drive towards business result. There was a great example the other day in the paper. There's a car sharing service in New York City called Car2Go. And they went on an initiative to make it easier to sign up for the service. And so as a result, they reduced the kind of background check for new members signing up. And first week they rolled this out, they had 42 cars stolen. Right. So there's notion of, like, what are the things, like, we want to increase this metric, but what are the things that we're worried about that we need to keep in check, and having these kind of bounding outcomes are important.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
And thanks for your question, Ben. Okay, so we got a question, another anonymous question. So I'll just kind of talk through it. I think it's a little bit of a nice bridge from what you were just talking about. So the backstory is with this member is in their org, they're tracking what you say here. So our objectives, our business outcomes, and the key results are more specific outcomes that will lead to the objectives. But we give product freedom to choose the tactics or the features that will lead to the key results. And we aren't achieving the outcome. So the question here is, where do you see the breakdowns, even though the strategic planning seems solid and product has the freedom to test and iterate? Sometimes problems are hard and the features don't deliver on the outcomes. And then there was a PS, and it says we only have one objective this quarter with 3 results under it, and it has that 1 or 2 or 3 will ladder up to the objective or business outcome that we want. So the question really is, okay, so you've got it set up correctly, outcomes focused, giving your team freedom, and how to handle it when they're not delivering.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I have enough information to answer that question. I mean, I can comment that, setting this up as a logical framework, I think, is really useful as a thinking tool. I think it creates a lot of alignment. I think it has the potential to create a lot of autonomy for teams. I think, in general, the way I think about all of the work that we're doing is we want to achieve the maximum outcome with the minimum possible output. And I think that this is a way of maximizing for outcome as opposed to output. If it's not working, I don't know. I mean, I think we could dig into your specific case. It's possible that the objectives are too ambitious, and maybe that's still good, right? I heard someone say, we were aiming for Mars and we got to the moon. Like, okay, that's still pretty good, right? Or maybe the results are just not sufficient, no matter how you look at them. But hard for me to diagnose the reason, right?
Okay, well, we will, yeah, I think that's a good kind of segue to, we have one more question, and we will, as a follow-up to this call, be sending everyone Josh's email address. And so if there are follow-up questions or more to be shared there, I think there's an opportunity to do that over email.
Yep.
Okay, the last question is from Paige. So she asks, for a project that will take a while with milestones over time, is it useful to try to define OKRs per milestone, or is that too heavy or not the right place? And then, for example, in order to get something to market, the goal is first to deliver the MVP into the customer's hands. Then it's about maintaining engagement and usage, or feedback and adjustment.
Yeah, so, the example that immediately springs to mind is this example that John Doerr, John Doerr's kind of wrote the Measure What Matters, and he worked very closely with Google, and he talks about the objective that Google set that resulted in the Chrome browser, right? That their objective was to create an internet operating system, a platform for browsing the internet that felt more like a magazine, that was fast and responsive and had experience quality similar to a magazine. So that was the objective, and the key result that they set was 10 million active users in the first year. And it was very specifically not 10 million downloads or 10 million signups, but 10 million active users, because the outcome there is that if you have active users, that they're getting value. It's not just that they downloaded it and tried it. And then I think, and I may get the details of the story wrong, but in the first year, they didn't hit that number. They hit it in the second year. They kept the objective. They moved the number to 20 million active users. And then they moved the number to 50 million, and then they moved the number to 100. So over multiple years, they kept that same objective, but they just kept moving the key result. And that would be kind of my way of thinking about it, that if you're setting your key result as we've delivered the beta, then that's a stop sign, right? That's your output. And so what you want to be measuring along the way in your program is we've delivered some value. And we know that we've delivered value when we see people doing X, right? So what are the things in that first beta? What are the new behaviors that beta is going to create for customers that let us know we've delivered something valuable?
Great. And then Paige had one last follow-up, which is, I assume they had to define active.
Yes. Yeah. When I tell that story, that's always the next question. It's like, I don't know how they defined active, but they had some conversation about what active meant, right? I tried it once and then I went back to Safari. Probably not, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Paige, and everyone, Paige, Ben, Pooja, everyone, for chiming in with great questions. And of course, a huge thank you, Josh, for your generosity and kind of sharing some of your thoughts around this and some of the kind of key points from the book. So really, really appreciate it.
Well, Maya, thank you for having me. It's really great to be here and to talk to all of you.
Yeah. And like I said, so we'll send a follow-up email with Josh's contact information. So if you'd like to connect with him directly, and we encourage any of you who, have thought about sharing your stories or insights in the written form, like kind of Josh has, to attend an upcoming CG talk with Josh's co-founder and co-author, Jeff Gothoff. The talk is on August 14th, and his talk is going to cover kind of his experiences on the path to becoming an author and how to build and engage an audience and being authentic and how to stay relevant in a world of continuous change. So it's going to be a good one, and Charlie will be sending out details about that as well. So thank you everyone for coming and for participating, and huge thank you to Charlie for making it all come together, and enjoy the rest of your day. See you later.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.